Her sisters married lords. Caroline expected to fade into spinsterhood until the most powerful duke in England shattered every rule and reached for her. The chandeliers of Auburn Hall bathed England's finest families in golden light, laughter and music curling through the air like silk. Caroline Ashford stood at the very edge of it all, present, yet invisible. At 29, she was no longer announced with anticipation, but with polite pity. A woman who had waited too long, a woman whose moment had passed. Across the ballroom, her sisters glowed like polished gems on the arms of their titled husbands. Their futures were secured, their reputations exalted. Caroline had ensured it herself, quietly managing debts, negotiating with creditors, selling what little jewelry she possessed. And tonight, as she watched her father laugh a little too loudly and drink a little too freely, she sensed the truth settling like ice. There was nothing left to bargain with. Then the room shifted. A ripple of whispers preceded the entrance of Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Avington, an untouchable figure wrapped in authority and mystery. Women straightened, men bowed. Everyone held their breath. Everyone, except Caroline, who met his gaze by accident. But the Duke did not look away. In that still moment, Caroline felt the first tremor of a future she had never dared imagine, dangerous, impossible, hers. London, autumn 1813. The grand assembly at Auburn Hall glittered with all the pageantry Caroline Ashford had once dreamed of joining. Now, she observed from the margins, a ghost in dove-grey silk, while younger women waltzed in jewel tones that caught the light. Still here, Miss Ashford? Lady Pemberton's voice dripped with false sympathy. How loyal you are to your father. Most women your age would have retired to the country by now. Caroline offered a practiced smile. Someone must ensure father doesn't lose the estate at the card tables, Lady Pemberton. The barb landed. Lady Pemberton's fan snapped open, concealing her pinched expression as she retreated. Caroline permitted herself a small satisfaction. If society insisted on treating her as invisible, she would at least maintain her dignity in the shadows. Her youngest sister, Henrietta, floated past in a cloud of rose silk, laughing at something her Earl husband whispered. Beyond her, Margaret danced with her Viscount, diamonds glittering at her throat, diamonds Caroline had helped purchase by selling their mother's pearls. Neither sister glanced her way. Caroline had made her peace with it. Her role was manager, not participant, protector, not beloved. When their father's gambling debts threatened to consume them all 3 years ago, she had been the one to quietly liquidate assets, renegotiate terms, stretch every penny. Her sisters' triumphant marriages were her victory, even if no one knew the price. A commotion at the entrance drew every eye. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow. The Duke of Avington, someone whispered, the name passing through the room like wind through wheat. Arthur Wellesley entered as though he owned not just the room, but the very air within it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes the color of winter steel. At 37, he commanded wealth, influence, and a reputation for being utterly unreachable. 3 seasons ago, his brief courtship of Lady Isabella Hartley had ended abruptly, and he'd retreated to his northern estates. Since then, he'd spurned every matchmaking mama in England. Caroline watched him scan the assembly with obvious disinterest. Then his gaze found hers. The room seemed to narrow. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, not with romantic fantasy, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition, assessment, decision. He began moving toward her. Panic fluttered in Caroline's chest. Surely he meant to pass her, to greet someone of actual importance behind her. She stepped aside. He stopped directly before her. Miss Ashford. His voice was deep, controlled, with the faintest Scottish burr beneath the polish. I wonder if you might grant me the next dance. The ballroom fell silent. Every fan stopped moving. Every conversation died. Caroline stared at him. Your Grace, I believe you're mistaken. I'm Caroline Ashford. I know precisely who you are. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. The question is whether you'll dance with me. She should refuse. This was theatre, some game she didn't understand. But her father was watching from across the room, hope and calculation naked on his flushed face. Whatever this was, it mattered. I would be honored, Your Grace. His hand closed around hers, warm and certain, and led her onto the floor. As the music swelled and they began to move, Caroline felt the weight of 100 stares. You're wondering why, he said quietly. I'm wondering what you want, Your Grace. Men like you don't approach women like me without reason. His eyes glinted with something that might have been respect. Practical. I like that. What I want, Miss Ashford, is a conversation. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, I'll call on your father. Regarding a proposition that will save your family from ruin, his voice dropped lower, and cost you everything you never expected to have. The waltz ended. He bowed, she curtsied, and he walked away, leaving Caroline standing alone in the center of the ballroom with her heart hammering and her future suddenly, terrifyingly uncertain. The Ashford drawing-room had never looked shabbier than it did under the Duke of Avington's scrutiny. Caroline watched him take in the faded upholstery, the slight water stain on the ceiling, the empty spaces on the walls where paintings had once hung. Her father sat across from them, hands trembling slightly, whether from last night's port or today's nerves. Caroline couldn't say. "Your Grace honors us with this visit," her father began, voice pitched too high with hope. Arthur's gaze moved to Caroline. "I'll be direct, Sir Edmund. Your financial situation is dire. Within 3 months, your creditors will seize this property. Your daughter's reputations, however well married, will suffer by association." Her father's face went ashen. Caroline felt ice settle in her stomach. She'd known it was bad, but 3 months? "How do you know this?" she asked quietly. "I make it my business to know such things." Arthur leaned back, utterly composed. "I also know that Miss Ashford has been managing your affairs for years, selling personal effects, negotiating with creditors, keeping this family afloat through sheer determination." Heat climbed Caroline's cheeks. "I did what was necessary." "Precisely." His eyes held hers. "Which is why I'm here. I require a wife, Sir Edmund. Not for love, not for heirs. I have cousins enough for succession. I need a duchess who understands duty, discretion, and the management of complex households." The words hit Caroline like cold water. A wife. He was proposing marriage. "Miss Ashford has demonstrated all these qualities," Arthur continued. "In exchange for her hand, I will settle all debts immediately, establish a trust for Sir Edmund's remaining years, and ensure your family name remains untarnished." Her father's expression transformed from shock to desperate joy. "Your Grace, this is extraordinarily generous. Caroline, did you hear? The Duke wishes to marry you." But Caroline was watching Arthur's face, reading what he wasn't saying. "Why me? You could have any woman in England. Younger, prettier, better connected. Younger women expect romance. Pretty women expect adoration. Well-connected women expect social dominance." His voice remained neutral, almost clinical. "I expect competence, intelligence, and the wisdom not to demand what I cannot give." "Affection, you mean?" "Love," he corrected. "I'm offering you security, position, and respect. I will be faithful, courteous, and generous. But I won't pretend to emotions I don't possess." The honesty was brutal and strangely refreshing. No flowery speeches, no false promises. Just a transaction, clearly stated. "And if I refuse?" Caroline asked. Her father made a strangled sound. Arthur's expression didn't change. "Then I'll take my leave. Your family will face ruin within the quarter, and you'll have the satisfaction of having rejected a duke." He paused. "But I don't believe you will refuse, Miss Ashford, not because of my title or my wealth, but because you've spent your entire adult life sacrificing yourself for this family. One more sacrifice won't break you." The words should have angered her. Instead, they felt like someone had finally seen her truly, completely, without romance or illusion. "You're asking me to give up any hope of finding real love. I'm asking you to accept what you've already resigned yourself to, but with significantly better compensation." Arthur stood, signaling the interview's end. "I'll return tomorrow for your answer. If you accept, we'll marry within the month. The settlements will be extraordinarily generous." At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Ashford, I believe we'll suit each other well. We're both practical people who understand that duty matters more than sentiment." After he left, her father seized her hands. "Caroline, you must accept. This is a miracle, a duke. Do you understand what this means?" She understood perfectly. It meant salvation for her family and a loveless marriage for herself. It meant becoming a duchess without ever being a bride in any real sense. It meant spending her life with a man who viewed her as a capable employee rather than a cherished wife. It meant exactly what she'd expected from life all along, except wrapped in ermine and coronets. "I'll give him my answer tomorrow, father." But they both knew what that answer would be. Avington Hall rose from the Derbyshire landscape like a fortress built of honey-coloured stone and centuries of power. As the ducal carriage rounded the final curve of the mile-long drive, Caroline pressed her gloved hand against the window, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what she'd agreed to become mistress of. "Impressive, isn't it?" Arthur's voice held a note she couldn't quite identify. Pride, perhaps, or warning. "Terrifying," Caroline replied honestly. They'd been married 3 days ago in a quiet ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square. Her sisters had wept prettily, her father had beamed, and Arthur had recited his vows with the same measured calm he might use to discuss crop rotation. The wedding breakfast had been elegant and brief. Then they'd departed for Derbyshire, spending 2 nights at coaching inns where Arthur had been unfailingly polite and had retired to separate rooms without comment. Now, as footmen rushed to open the carriage door and a battalion of servants assembled on the front steps, Caroline felt the weight of her new reality settling over her like a heavy cloak. Arthur descended first, then turned to hand her down. "They're curious about you," he murmured. "The previous Duchess, my mother, died when I was 12. The household has been without a mistress for 25 years. 25 years? Caroline's stomach knotted. She was inheriting not just a role, but a void. The butler, an imposing man with silver hair and ramrod posture, bowed deeply. "Your Graces. Welcome home. May I present the staff of Avington Hall?" What followed was a blur of names and faces. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, with sharp eyes that assessed Caroline from head to toe. Mr. Denholm, the steward, whose skeptical expression suggested he doubted her competence. Dozens of maids, footmen, grooms, and kitchen staff, all watching their new Duchess with varying degrees of hope and suspicion. "Thank you all," Caroline said when the introductions concluded. "I look forward to learning from each of you about the traditions and operations of Avington Hall. I know I have much to discover." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled staff. Mrs. Winters' expression softened almost imperceptibly. Inside, the hall was even more magnificent and more intimidating. Soaring ceilings, ancestral portraits glaring down from the walls, marble floors that echoed their footsteps like judgments. "Your rooms are in the West Wing," Arthur said, leading her up a grand staircase. "I've had them refurbished, but if anything displeases you, you need only inform Mrs. Winters." The Duchess's apartments were breathtaking. A sitting room in soft creams and golds opened into a bedchamber, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed draped in silk. Beyond lay a dressing room larger than the entire upper floor of her father's house. "My rooms adjoin yours," Arthur indicated a connecting door. "For convenience, though your privacy will be absolute." Caroline turned to face him. "Arthur, Your Grace." "Arthur," he corrected gently. "We're married, Caroline. Some informality is appropriate in private." "Arthur, then," she drew a breath. "What exactly do you expect of me?" He considered the question seriously. "Manage the household, oversee the staff, handle correspondence and social obligations, represent the duchy with dignity." He paused. "I expect you to make Avington Hall a home again, not merely a monument." "And you?" she asked. "What will you be doing?" "Managing 5 estates, sitting in Parliament when in session, overseeing investments and tenant concerns." His expression remained neutral. "I keep early hours and often dine alone when working. You shouldn't expect much of my company." The loneliness of it struck her forcefully. A vast house, a distant husband, a role she'd barely begun to understand. "I see," she said quietly. Something flickered in Arthur's eyes, regret, perhaps, or sympathy. "This isn't what you imagined for your life." "No," Caroline agreed. "But then, I'd imagined nothing at all. At least this is something." He studied her for a long moment. "You're remarkably pragmatic. It's my defining characteristic, apparently." She managed a small smile. "I should unpack. Mrs. Winters will expect me to review the household accounts tomorrow." "Caroline," Arthur's voice stopped her as she moved toward the dressing room. "You'll manage admirably. I have no doubt of that." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered. She held onto it like a lifeline as he withdrew to his own chambers, leaving her alone in rooms grander than anything she'd ever imagined inhabiting. Through the window, the Derbyshire hills rolled away in shades of green and gold. Beautiful, vast, and utterly foreign. Caroline had never felt more alone or more determined to prove she belonged here. Even if no one, including her husband, believed a spinster from a failing family could become the Duchess of Avington in anything but name. 3 weeks into her tenure as Duchess, Caroline had established a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Mornings with Mrs. Winters reviewing menus and household matters, afternoons responding to correspondence or visiting the estate's tenant families, evenings reading alone in the library while Arthur worked in his study. They were ships passing in gilded hallways, polite, distant, perfectly civil. Until the evening she found him in the music room. Caroline had been seeking a book of poetry she'd misplaced, following the sound of piano music through the darkened corridors. She pushed open the door to find Arthur seated at the pianoforte, his coat discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows, playing Beethoven with surprising skill and even more surprising emotion. He didn't notice her at first, lost in the cascade of notes. His face, usually so controlled, held something raw grief, perhaps, or longing. The music swelled and fell like waves, pulling at something deep in Caroline's chest. When the final notes faded, she couldn't help herself. That was beautiful. Arthur's head snapped up, his expression shuddering immediately. I didn't realize anyone was here. I'm sorry. I was looking for a book. She moved to retreat. I'll leave you to... No, he stood abruptly. Stay, please, unless you'd prefer not to. Caroline hesitated, then moved into the room. I didn't know you played. My mother taught me. His voice was carefully neutral again, but something in his posture remained vulnerable. She loved music. After she died, I continued. She would be proud. You play with real feeling. Arthur's jaw tightened. Feeling is a luxury, not an asset. Is that what your father taught you? The question hung in the air. Arthur turned to stare out the window at the moonlit gardens. My father taught me that dukes don't indulge in sentiment. That duty supersedes all personal inclination. That weakness invites exploitation. Caroline moved closer, drawn by the rare glimpse beneath his armor. And you believed him? I had little choice. His voice hardened. My mother's death nearly destroyed him. He became obsessed with control, with ensuring nothing and no one could hurt him again. He raised me to be invulnerable. No one is invulnerable, Arthur. No. He met her eyes. Something haunted in his gaze. But one can build walls high enough that it doesn't matter. Caroline understood walls. She'd built plenty of her own. Is that why you married me? Because I wouldn't scale them? I married you because you seemed unlikely to try. He moved toward her, stopping a careful distance away. But you're not what I expected, Caroline. Her heart stuttered. How so? You manage the household with remarkable efficiency. Yes. But you also visit the tenants with genuine interest. You remember the names of every servant's children. You've transformed the morning room into something actually pleasant. His expression softened fractionally. You're making this mausoleum feel almost like a home. The compliment, unexpected and sincere, warmed her more than it should. That was your instruction, wasn't it? To make it a home. I didn't think it was possible. He paused. I didn't think I wanted it to be. And now? Arthur's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Now I find myself seeking excuses to cross paths with you, timing my rides to coincide with your morning walks, choosing books from the library. I know you've been reading, just to understand what captures your attention. Caroline's pulse hammered. Arthur, I'm not proposing we alter our arrangement, he said quickly. I'm merely acknowledging that you've become more than a competent household manager. You've become someone I respect, someone whose company I find myself wanting. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But coming from Arthur, it felt like an earthquake. I enjoy your company as well, Caroline admitted softly. The few times we've actually shared it. Then perhaps we might share it more often. He gestured to the pianoforte. Do you play? Poorly. But I love music. Then sit. It was more invitation than command. I'll play, you'll listen, and we'll see if comfortable companionship might be added to our list of practical arrangements. Caroline settled onto the bench beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. As Arthur began a Mozart sonata, she felt the careful distance between them shift into something warmer, something that felt dangerously close to intimacy. His hands moved across the keys with practiced grace, and Caroline found herself watching them rather than the music-strong hands, capable hands, hands that had never touched her beyond the necessary courtesies of their wedding day. She wondered, suddenly and unbidden, what it might feel like if they did. The thought shocked her with its intensity. This was a business arrangement. Arthur had been clear about his expectations. She had no right to hope for more. Yet, as the music swelled around them and Arthur's expression softened into something almost peaceful, Caroline felt the first dangerous stirrings of longing, not for position or security, but for the man himself. When the piece ended, Arthur turned to her. "Same time tomorrow?" "Yes," Caroline whispered. "I'd like that very much." As she returned to her chambers later, her hand brushed the spot on the bench where his had briefly touched hers. The warmth lingered like a promise neither of them had spoken, but both, perhaps, were beginning to feel. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by special courier. Caroline watched Arthur's face transform as he read it, his jaw tightening, color draining from his cheeks, the carefully controlled mask slipping to reveal something that looked like dread. "Arthur?" She set down her teacup. "What is it?" He folded the letter with deliberate precision. "Lady Isabella Hartley, now the Marchioness of Blackwood, is travelling through Derbyshire. She requests accommodation for the evening." The name struck Caroline like a physical blow. Lady Isabella, the woman Arthur had courted 3 years ago, before their engagement had ended in whispered scandal and his retreat from society. "I see." Caroline kept her voice steady. "When does she arrive?" "This afternoon." Arthur's expression was unreadable. "I apologize for the imposition. Isabella has always been persistent. She was important to you." "It wasn't a question." Arthur met her eyes. "She was a mistake, one I've spent 3 years trying to forget." Before Caroline could respond, Mrs. Winters appeared at the door. "Your Grace, the guest chambers, should I prepare the rose suite?" "The blue suite," Arthur said firmly. "In the east wing. The farthest possible location from their own rooms." Caroline noted it with a mixture of relief and unease. The Marchioness of Blackwood arrived in a flurry of outriders and luggage, descending from her carriage like a vision from a fashion plate. She was breathtakingly beautiful, raven hair, porcelain skin, eyes the color of spring violets, and a figure that made Caroline acutely conscious of her own more modest charms. "Arthur!" Isabella swept forward, hands extended, ignoring every protocol. "How wonderful to see you. You've been hiding away in the country like a hermit." "Isabella," Arthur's voice was cool as he bowed correctly but without warmth. "May I present my wife, Caroline, Duchess of Avington?" Isabella's gaze finally shifted to Caroline, assessment sharp beneath the smile. "Your Duchess? How? Unexpected." The pause before the last word was calculated. "I hadn't heard you were considering marriage again." "Again?" Caroline asked quietly. "We were engaged, briefly." Isabella's smile sharpened. 3 years ago, before Arthur decided he preferred solitude to my company." "That's not quite accurate," Arthur said, his tone edged with warning. "Isn't it? I suppose we remember things differently." Isabella turned back to Caroline with false warmth. "But how delightful that Arthur finally found someone suitable. Tell me, how did you capture his attention? He's notoriously difficult to impress." Caroline felt the barb beneath the sweetness. "I believe we found each other mutually. Practical." "Practical." Isabella's laugh was like breaking glass. "How very, Arthur. He always did prize utility over passion." "If you'll excuse me," Caroline said, rising with dignity. "I should ensure your rooms are prepared to your satisfaction, Lady Blackwood." "How kind." Isabella's eyes glittered. "Though I do remember the way to the guest chambers. I spent quite a lot of time at Avington Hall once." The implication hung in the air. Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks but refused to give Isabella the satisfaction of a reaction. That evening, dinner became an elaborate game of verbal chess. Isabella dominated the conversation, dropping references to shared memories with Arthur, private jokes, intimate knowledge of his preferences, stories that excluded Caroline entirely. "Do you remember the house party at Thornfield, Arthur? When we got caught in that storm and had to shelter in the old groundskeeper's cottage?" Isabella's voice dripped with suggestion. "We were there for hours." "I remember very little about it," Arthur replied neutrally. "Liar," Isabella laughed. "You remember everything. You always did. It's that brilliant mind of yours, retaining every detail, every moment." Her gaze slid to Caroline. "I'm sure the Duchess finds it quite impressive." "I find many things about my husband impressive," Caroline said evenly. "His integrity chief among them." Isabella's smile tightened. "Integrity, yes. Though sometimes I wonder if what we call integrity is simply fear dressed in moral superiority." Arthur's fork clattered against his plate. "That's enough." Isabella. Is it? The Marchioness's mask slipped, revealing something hard and angry beneath. You threw me away, Arthur. Ended our engagement with barely an explanation. Let society speculate while you hid here like a wounded animal. Our engagement ended because you were pursuing 2 other men simultaneously, Arthur said quietly, each word precise and cutting. I have many flaws, Isabella, but tolerating infidelity isn't among them. Silence crashed over the table. Isabella's face flushed red, then white. You have no proof of that, she whispered. I have letters, sworn statements, enough proof that your father begged me not to make it public. Arthur's voice remained controlled, but Caroline heard the old wound beneath it. I agreed to let you claim we were incompatible. You agreed to leave me in peace. Peace? Isabella's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call this? A marriage of convenience to a nobody from a bankrupt family? This is your grand revenge? Caroline stood abruptly. I believe, Lady Blackwood, that your departure is overdue. I'll have your carriage prepared immediately. Don't bother. Isabella rose with cold dignity. I've seen enough. Arthur, you've made your point. You've buried yourself alive with a woman who doesn't even understand what she's lost you. After Isabella's dramatic exit, Caroline found herself alone in the drawing room, hands trembling with suppressed emotion. She heard Arthur's footsteps behind her but didn't turn. Caroline, she's right, isn't she? Caroline's voice was barely audible. I don't understand. I don't know what I cost you by accepting your proposal, who you might have married if not for the necessity of saving my family. Arthur moved in front of her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. Isabella cost me my ability to trust, my willingness to risk my heart. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. You've begun to restore both. That's not a loss, Caroline. That's a gift I never expected to receive. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a whisper of touch that sent warmth spiraling through her. I should have told you about her, he continued, about why I'm so guarded, so determined to keep everything controlled and safe. And now, Caroline whispered, do you still feel safe? Arthur's eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. No, he admitted, and it terrifies me. Isabella departed at dawn, but her poison lingered like smoke. Within a week, letters began arriving from London, carefully worded notes from Caroline's sisters, concerned inquiries from former acquaintances, all dancing around the same rumours. The Duke's marriage was one of convenience only. The Duchess was a placeholder. Isabella had visited Avington Hall, and tensions were complicated. Caroline read each letter with growing unease, watching the narrative being constructed around her marriage. At evening gatherings in London, drawing rooms she would never attend, her union with Arthur was being dissected, analysed, and found wanting. They're saying I trapped you, she told Arthur one evening in the library, setting down the latest missive. That I used my family's debts to manipulate you into marriage. Arthur looked up from his correspondence, frown deepening. That's absurd. I proposed to you. But why? The question burst from Caroline before she could stop it. Isabella is beautiful, connected, everything a duchess should be. Yes, she betrayed you, but there were a dozen other women of her caliber. Why choose me? Arthur set down his pen with deliberate care. Do you truly not know? I know what you said. Practical, competent, unlikely to demand affection. I lied. The words cut through the room. Not entirely, but partially. Yes, I wanted someone who wouldn't expect romantic declarations, but I chose you because when I watched you at that ball, I saw a woman who had sacrificed everything for people who barely noticed her existence. I saw strength without bitterness, dignity without arrogance. His voice softened. I saw someone who might understand what it means to carry burdens alone. Caroline's throat tightened. Arthur, Isabella wants to destroy what we're building, he continued. Not because she loves me, but because she cannot bear that I found peace without her. She'll use every weapon in her arsenal: gossip, innuendo, social pressure. Then, what do? We do nothing. Arthur's expression hardened with determination. We continue as we have been. Let our actions speak for themselves. But 3 days later, the situation escalated dramatically. A rider arrived bearing a letter sealed with the Blackwood crest. Arthur read it in his study, and when he emerged, his face was ashen. What is it? Caroline asked, alarm spiking through her. Isabella has information about your father's debts, detailed information about payments I made, Terms I negotiated. His voice was tight with controlled fury. She's threatening to release it publicly, claiming I essentially purchased you, that our marriage is nothing more than a financial transaction that borders on impropriety. Caroline felt the world tilt. But you did pay the debts. That was part of our agreement. Yes, but presented correctly, it can be made to look like I exploited your family's desperation, that you had no real choice. Arthur ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. She's clever. The scandal won't destroy us, but it will taint our reputation, make every social interaction uncomfortable, undermine your position as Duchess. What does she want? Arthur's jaw tightened. A private meeting. To discuss terms, as she puts it. You can't go alone. I certainly can't bring you. That's exactly what she wants, to create a scene where you appear jealous and insecure. Then we call her bluff, Caroline said, though her voice trembled. Let her release whatever information she has. We know the truth. The truth rarely matters in society, Caroline. Perception does. Arthur moved to the window, staring out at the darkening grounds. I won't let her hurt you. I'll meet with her, end this. No. Caroline moved to his side, surprising herself with her vehemence. You said we do nothing, that our actions speak for themselves. Going to her, negotiating, trying to appease her, that's doing something. That's giving her power. Arthur turned to face her, surprise flickering in his eyes. You're suggesting we ignore the threat entirely. I'm suggesting we trust in what we've built. You and I both know this marriage has become more than a transaction. Her heart hammered as she forced herself to continue. At least, it has for me. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Arthur's gaze searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. Caroline, his voice was rough. You should know these past weeks. The evenings in the music room, our conversations, the way you've transformed this house. He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. You've made me want things I convinced myself I'd never have, things I'm not certain I deserve. What things? She whispered. Instead of answering, Arthur reached out and cupped her face with one hand, his touch achingly gentle. Things that terrify me, that make me vulnerable in ways Isabella's betrayal never did. Caroline's breath caught. She could feel the war raging behind his eyes, the desire to protect himself, warring with the desire to move closer to her. Before either could speak, a commotion erupted in the entrance hall. Voices, urgent and alarmed. Arthur's hand dropped from her face as Denholm burst into the room without knocking. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. There's been an incident in the village. The Marchioness of Blackwood's carriage overturned. She's demanding to see you, claiming injury. Arthur's expression shuttered immediately. Of course she is. Caroline felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. This was no accident. Isabella had orchestrated something, some new manipulation designed to force Arthur's hand. We go together, Caroline said firmly. Whatever she's planning, we face it together. Arthur looked at her for a long moment, something like admiration warming his eyes. Together, he agreed, though I suspect that's the last thing Isabella expects. As they prepared to depart for the village, Caroline felt the fragile intimacy of moments before fracturing under the weight of Isabella's machinations. The woman was determined to drive a wedge between them, and Caroline realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way she'd stopped viewing this marriage as a practical arrangement and started viewing it as something worth fighting for. The question was whether Arthur felt the same, or whether Isabella's reappearance would send him retreating behind the walls Caroline had only just begun to scale. They found Isabella at the village inn, reclining dramatically on a chaise with a bandaged ankle, surrounded by concerned locals and her travelling companion, Lady Pritchard, a notorious gossip who would ensure every detail of this encounter reached London within days. Arthur, Isabella extended a trembling hand. Thank heavens you've come. The pain is excruciating. How unfortunate, Caroline said coolly before Arthur could respond. Dr. Morrison should examine you immediately. I'll send for him. Isabella's eyes flashed irritation. That won't be necessary. I merely need somewhere to rest until I'm well enough to travel. A few days at Avington Hall. The inn has perfectly adequate accommodations, Caroline interrupted smoothly. I'm sure you'll be comfortable here. But surely, as old friends, Arthur would want to offer me the hospitality of his home. Isabella's voice pitched toward plaintive. Unless the new Duchess forbids such kindness. The trap was obvious. Refuse, and Caroline appeared jealous and cruel. Accept, and Isabella would have days to work her poison from within Avington Hall itself. "Lady Blackwood," Arthur said quietly, his voice carrying steel beneath the courtesy, "my wife's judgment in household matters is absolute. If she believes the inn is more appropriate, then it is." Isabella's mask slipped, revealing fury. "How thoroughly you've been domesticated. The Arthur I knew would never have hidden behind his wife's skirts. The Arthur you knew was a fool who mistook beauty for character." Arthur's tone remained even, but Caroline heard the edge beneath. "I've learned since then." "Have you?" Isabella sat up straighter, abandoning her injured pose. "Then perhaps you've also learned that I've compiled quite a detailed account of your marriage arrangements, the exact sums paid to Sir Edmund Ashford, the timing of the payments relative to your proposal, the rather suspicious convenience of it all." "There was nothing suspicious about it," Caroline said, finding her voice. "His Grace offered an arrangement that benefited both parties. I accepted with full knowledge and consent." "Did you?" Isabella's smile was venomous. "Or did you simply lack any other option? A spinster from a bankrupt family, nearing 30, no prospects. How much choice did you really have when England's wealthiest duke offered to save you?" The words struck deep because they contained truth. Caroline had felt desperate, trapped, out of options. But they also missed something crucial. "You're right," Caroline said, surprising everyone, including herself. "I had no other options. I was desperate. I would have agreed to almost anything to save my family." She moved closer to Isabella, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. "But that's not what our marriage is now. Whatever it began as, it's become something neither of us expected. Something genuine." "How touching." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "And you believe that? You think a man like Arthur, who spent 3 years nursing his wounds after I rejected him, is capable of genuine feeling?" "I didn't reject you," Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I discovered you were conducting affairs with Lord Pemberton and Sir James Carstairs simultaneously while wearing my ring. I ended an engagement to a woman of questionable character. There's a difference. You have no proof. I have letters, written in your hand, detailing assignations, professing affection to other men while accepting my courtship." Arthur pulled a folded packet from his coat. "Letters I've kept as insurance against precisely this sort of manipulation." Isabella's face went white. "You wouldn't dare make those public." "Try me." Arthur's expression was implacable. "Release your exposé about my marriage, and I'll release documented proof of your infidelity. We'll see which scandal society finds more compelling, a duke who helped his wife's family, or a marchioness who betrayed multiple men while hunting for the highest title." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Arthur moved to stand beside Caroline, his proximity deliberate and protective. "I've spent 3 years believing I was broken, that Isabella's betrayal had destroyed my capacity for trust or affection. I built walls so high I convinced myself I didn't want or need intimacy." He turned to face Caroline, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. "Then I met a woman who asked for nothing but gave everything, who transformed my house into a home, who learned the names of every tenant's children, who plays chess with my steward and listens to Mrs. Winter's stories about the old days." His voice softened. "Who made me want to tear down every wall I'd built, even though it terrified me." "Arthur," Caroline whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "So yes, Isabella, I would dare anything to protect what Caroline and I are building." He looked back at the Marchioness with cold determination. "Leave Derbyshire, leave us alone, or discover exactly how ruthless I can be when defending what I value." Isabella stared at them both, calculation warring with rage on her beautiful face. Finally, she stood, testing her supposedly injured ankle with no apparent difficulty. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Both of you." "I doubt it," Arthur replied. "My only regret is wasting 3 years mourning something that was never real." After Isabella swept out with Lady Pritchard trailing behind, Caroline found herself trembling with reaction. Arthur took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Was any of that true?" she asked. "What you said about me, about us?" "Every word." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth cascading through her. "I'm not practiced at expressing affection, Caroline. I'm better with accounts than emotions. But I need you to know you've become essential to me. Not as a duchess or a household manager, but as yourself." "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet." Arthur's thumb traced circles on her palm. "Just know that when I look at you now, I don't see a convenient arrangement. I see a future I want, a partnership I value, a woman I'm falling in love with, even though it terrifies me more than any scandal Isabella could manufacture. Caroline's heart soared and broke simultaneously. He was falling in love with her. With her. I'm terrified too, she admitted. I never expected this, any of this. Neither did I. Arthur pulled her closer, his free hand rising to cup her cheek. But perhaps the best things are the ones we never plan for. When he kissed her, it was nothing like their chaste wedding kiss. This was heat and promise, and 3 weeks of growing tension, finally finding release. Caroline melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, discovering that practical, controlled Arthur kissed with surprising passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Arthur rested his forehead against hers. "Take me home," Caroline whispered. "Our home." "Yes," Arthur agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Home. As their carriage rolled back toward Avington Hall, Caroline realized that somewhere between a desperate bargain and this moment, she'd stopped being a duchess of convenience and become something far more dangerous and wonderful. A woman genuinely, terrifyingly, joyfully in love with her husband. Isabella's final act of vengeance arrived 3 days later, not as a letter, but as a scandal sheet delivered to every notable household in England. The broadside was masterfully crafted, just enough truth woven with innuendo to be devastating. "Duchess by default. The curious case of Avington's convenient marriage," screamed the headline, followed by carefully worded suggestions about financial impropriety, desperation, and a duke who'd chosen a bride of necessity rather than distinction. Caroline read it in the morning room, her hands shaking as she absorbed each poisonous line. Arthur found her there an hour later, the crumpled paper on the floor beside her chair. "She did it," Caroline said numbly. "Everything we feared." Arthur picked up the broadside, his expression darkening as he read. "This is actionable libel. I'll have my solicitors." "No." Caroline stood abruptly. "That's what she wants. A legal battle that keeps the scandal alive for months. We need to do something else." "What do you suggest?" Caroline took a breath, the idea forming even as she spoke. "We go to London, immediately. We face society together, show them that we're united, that these accusations are meaningless. That's a significant risk. You'll be scrutinized, questioned, subjected to cutting remarks and calculated slights." "I know." Caroline met his eyes steadily. "But I'm not the frightened spinster who accepted your proposal anymore, Arthur. I'm the Duchess of Avington, and I won't hide while Isabella destroys what we've built." Something fierce and proud blazed in Arthur's expression. "Then we go to London, together." They arrived in the capital 2 days later, taking up residence in Avington House, a magnificent townhouse in Mayfair that Caroline had never seen. Within hours, calling cards began arriving, society's most influential members requesting the honor of the Duke and Duchess's presence at various functions. "They're circling like sharks," Caroline observed, sorting through the invitations. "Curious to see if the scandal is true. Then we'll show them exactly who we are." Arthur moved behind her chair, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "Starting with Lady Pemberton's ball tonight. The entire ton will be there." Lady Pemberton's ball proved every bit as daunting as Caroline had feared. The moment they were announced, conversation died, every eye fixed on them with avid curiosity and barely concealed judgment. Arthur's hand tightened on hers. "Courage," he murmured. They descended the stairs together, Caroline's chin high, Arthur's bearing radiating ducal authority. Lady Pemberton greeted them with calculating warmth, clearly relishing the drama. "Your Graces, how delightful. We've all been so curious about your whirlwind marriage. Do tell us how you met." "At Auburn Hall," Caroline replied smoothly. "His Grace requested a dance, and I was foolish enough to accept." Polite laughter rippled through the nearby guests. Arthur's mouth quirked with genuine amusement. "I consider it the most intelligent decision of my life," Arthur said, his voice carrying across the room. "My wife has proven herself an extraordinary duchess and an even more extraordinary woman." The declaration sent whispers cascading through the assembly. This wasn't the cool, distant duke they remembered. This was a man openly expressing affection for his wife. Throughout the evening, they moved through the crowd as a united front, when Lord Hartley made a sly comment about convenient arrangements. Arthur's response was swift and cutting. When Lady Morrison suggested Caroline must find her new position overwhelming, Caroline described her work with the estate tenants with such genuine passion that the older woman's skepticism transformed into approval. But the true test came when Isabella herself appeared, arriving late with her husband, the Marquis of Blackwood, a distinguished man in his 50s who seemed utterly unaware of his wife's machinations. "Your Graces," Isabella curtsied with perfect propriety, malice glittering beneath her smile. "How brave of you to attend, given recent publications." "Publications are merely paper and ink," Caroline replied evenly. "They can't alter truth or genuine affection." "Affection?" Isabella's laugh was brittle. "How charmingly you perform the role, Duchess. But we all know." "We know that you attempted to blackmail us," Arthur interrupted coldly. "That you orchestrated a scandal out of spite. That you've spent 3 years unable to accept that I'm happier without you than I ever was in your company." The nearby guests had fallen silent, riveted by the confrontation. Isabella's face flushed. "You wouldn't dare." "I would." Arthur pulled the packet of letters from his coat. "Should I read these aloud? Let society judge which scandal is more compelling, a duke who helped his wife's family, or a marchioness who betrayed multiple men while hunting for titles." The Marquis of Blackwood had drawn closer, his expression thunderous. "What letters?" "Nothing, darling," Isabella said quickly, her composure cracking. "The Duke is merely letters my wife wrote to other men during various courtships," Arthur continued remorselessly. "Documented infidelity. I've kept silent out of respect for your position, Blackwood, but I won't tolerate her attacking my marriage." The Marquess's face darkened with fury as he looked at his wife. "Isabella, is this true?" "We should discuss this privately," Isabella whispered, her earlier confidence evaporating. "Indeed we should." The Marquess took his wife's arm with barely controlled anger. "Your Graces, please accept my apologies for any distress my wife has caused. I assure you it will not continue." As they departed, the crowd erupted into frenzied whispers. But the narrative had shifted. The Duke and Duchess stood together, dignified and united, while Isabella fled in disgrace. Lady Jersey, the most influential patroness of Almack's, approached with shrewd eyes. "Well played, Your Graces. I confess I had doubts about your marriage, but I see now that the doubts themselves were the scandal." "Thank you, Lady Jersey," Caroline said. "You've shown remarkable grace under pressure, Duchess. I believe you'll be an asset to society." She paused. "I'll make certain everyone knows my opinion on the matter." As the evening continued, the tide turned decisively in their favor. Lords and ladies who had been coolly distant became warmly congratulatory. The scandal that was meant to destroy them had instead become their triumph. Later, in their carriage returning to Avington House, Caroline finally allowed herself to collapse against Arthur's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional toll. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it," Arthur corrected, wrapping his arm around her. "Your courage, your grace, Caroline. You were magnificent." She looked up at him, seeing not the distant duke of their wedding day, but the man who had become her partner, her defender, her love. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "Without knowing you stood beside me." Arthur's expression softened with tenderness. "I will always stand beside you, not because duty demands it, but because I choose you. Every day, I choose you." When he kissed her, it was a promise and a celebration. They had faced the fire together and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger, their bond forged in the crucible of scandal and proven genuine beyond doubt. Spring returned to Avington Hall with a riot of color that seemed to mirror the transformation within its walls. Caroline stood at her bedchamber window, watching the gardens bloom beneath the April sun, her hand resting unconsciously on the slight swell of her abdomen, a secret she'd discovered only yesterday and hadn't yet shared. "You're awake early," Arthur's voice came from behind her, warm with sleep and affection. She turned to find him leaning against the connecting doorway, his hair disheveled, shirt half-buttoned, so different from the rigidly controlled Duke she'd married 6 months ago. These small intimacies still amazed her, the way he sought her company before dawn, the casual touches throughout the day, the laughter that now echoed through rooms that had been silent for decades. "I was thinking," Caroline said softly, "about how much has changed." Arthur crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Regrets? Not a single one." She leaned into his warmth. "Though I never imagined I could be this happy. Happiness wasn't part of our arrangement." "Our arrangement," Arthur murmured against her hair, "was the greatest act of self-deception I've ever committed. I convinced myself I wanted convenience, when what I truly wanted was you. I just didn't know it yet." Caroline turned in his arms to face him. "I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made him still, his grey eyes searching hers with sudden intensity. "What is it?" "We're going to have a child. By autumn." For a moment, Arthur seemed unable to breathe. Then his face transformed with a joy so profound it brought tears to Caroline's eyes. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her gently before setting her down with exquisite care, as though she might break. "Caroline," his voice was rough with emotion, "my extraordinary wife, you've given me everything I never knew I needed." "We've given each other everything," she corrected, framing his face with her hands. "You made me believe I was worth loving, that my practical nature and quiet strength were virtues, not failures. You saw me when everyone else looked through me." Arthur kissed her then, deep and reverent, and Caroline felt the truth of their transformation. This man, who had proposed a marriage of convenience, who had promised respect but not love, now held her as though she were more precious than all his estates combined. A knock at the door interrupted them. Arthur groaned softly. "Whoever that is, they have spectacularly poor timing." Mrs. Winters appeared, apologetic but urgent. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. Lord and Lady Barton have arrived from London. They claim it's a matter of some importance." Caroline's youngest sister, Henrietta, and her husband rarely visited without warning. Unease prickled down her spine as she exchanged glances with Arthur. 20 minutes later, dressed and composed, they received their guests in the morning room. Henrietta looked pale and worried, while Lord Barton's usual affability was notably absent. "Forgive the unexpected visit," Henrietta began, twisting her hands anxiously. "But we received this yesterday and thought you should know immediately." She handed Caroline a letter. As Caroline read, her blood ran cold. "Isabella is circulating new rumors," Henrietta explained, "claiming that her exposure of your marriage arrangements was actually justified, that she has evidence you manipulated Arthur into marriage through some kind of deception about father's debts, that the amounts were fabricated." "That's absurd," Arthur said flatly. "Every transaction was legitimate and documented." "We know that," Lord Barton interjected. "But Isabella is clever. She's not claiming financial fraud exactly, she's suggesting emotional manipulation. That Caroline exaggerated the situation to trap you into a proposal." Arthur's expression hardened dangerously. "I've had enough of Isabella's machinations. It's time to end this permanently." "How?" Caroline asked, though dread weighted her stomach. She'd thought they'd won. She'd thought Isabella had finally retreated by telling the complete truth publicly. Arthur turned to her, his gaze steady and determined. "Not just about Isabella's infidelity, but about us, about how our marriage began and what it's become." "That will expose our private arrangements," Caroline protested. "Yes," Arthur agreed, "but it will also demonstrate that two people can enter a practical arrangement and discover genuine love. That convenience can transform into devotion, that our beginning doesn't diminish what we've built." He took her hands in his. "I'm tired of hiding behind pride and propriety. I want all of England to know that I fell in love with my wife not because I was trapped or manipulated, but because she's remarkable, because every day with her is a gift I never expected to receive." Henrietta dabbed at her eyes. "That's beautiful, Arthur, truly. But are you prepared for the scrutiny?" Lord Barton asked seriously. "Once you open that door, society will dissect every aspect of your relationship." Caroline looked at her husband, this man who had been so guarded, so determined to protect himself from vulnerability. Now he was proposing to expose their most intimate truth to public judgment, all to defend her honor. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "If we can show even one other couple that practical beginnings can lead to profound love, that marriages of convenience can become marriages of devotion, then whatever criticism we face will be worth it." Arthur's eyes blazed with pride and love. "Then we face it together, as we always have, as we always will." He pulled her close, regardless of their audience, and kissed her forehead with tender reverence. "You stole my heart without even trying, Caroline. You simply lived your truth with such grace that I couldn't help but fall completely, irrevocably in love with you. And you," Caroline whispered, "gave me a life I never dared dream of, not because of your title or your wealth, but because you chose me. Every day, you choose me." Outside, spring sunshine warmed the grounds of Avington Hall. Inside, a duchess and a duke prepared to face their greatest challenge, yet not scandal or societal judgment, but the vulnerable act of sharing their love story with a world that believed fairy tales only happened to young, beautiful women. Caroline Ashford had been neither young nor celebrated when she became a duchess, but she had become something far more important, beloved, cherished, and finally, truly seen. And that, she thought as Arthur's hand found hers, was the greatest triumph of all.